Hi everyone, Mark Iskowitz here, Editor-at-Large for MM+M. I'm pleased to be back with you all again for our final session of the day. We're still here and we're thriving. Just a few quick words of introduction before I introduce our panel. For all the We Live in a Digital World chatter, so-called mature media still attract plenty of pharma and health and wellness dollars. But how have these media been able to continue to lure advertisers to their mainstay properties, even as they simultaneously transition their businesses into the digital realm? And now I'd like to introduce you to my panelists for this 45-minute session. First, it gives me great pleasure to say hello to Marla Newman. Marla is Executive Vice President, Digital Sales at Meredith Corporation. She started there about 3.5 years ago as VP of Digital Sales, but she has years of experience as a publisher and is an alum of such companies as Microsoft, Fox Sports, and several other networks. So quite a track record on the sales side. Welcome, Marla.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
Absolutely excited to have you. And next up, I'm equally pleased to welcome to the broadcast Jan Weinstein. Jan is Executive Director at Publicis Health Media. Jan is an alum of such media shops as Wavemaker, where she led Amgen business, Carrot, where she led Pfizer business, Media Edge, and the Firm Initiative. She also enjoyed a stint at FCB, where she led the agency's DTC accounts ranging from Lilly, Merck, Roche, Alcon, and others. So quite a track record on the buy side. Welcome, Jan.
Thank you for having me, and I look forward to a great session.
Absolutely, I do as well. And speaking of that, everybody who's joined us today, you're in for a real treat. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get to the discussion. This is a 45-minute session. We'll devote about 25 or 30 of that to the main discussion and leave 10 to 15 minutes for audience questions. So please use the Q&A function on the left side of your dashboard to submit a question anytime during the webcast, really. If you have something that you'd like to pose to our esteemed panel, knowing Marla and Jan, that 45 minutes is going to go by pretty quickly. So get while the getting's good and submit a question if you have one. Okay, on to our discussion now. As the title of this session suggests, we're going to talk about so-called traditional media, including print, and its evolving role as the worlds of media start to merge, and as pharma brands become more comfortable buying media of all sorts and in many different ways. So let's begin with some definitions. Marla, would you mind kind of setting the stage for us in terms of how you define mature media?
Mature media can mean a lot of different things. And I think that at the end of the day, it means a platform that has a known audience, a steady audience at scale, that has been in the marketplace long enough to have demonstrated, in our case, great performance and great value to the consumers. So it's a medium that has had some history, right? That has a lot of knowledge of how to continue to serve consumers and continues to evolve and to build on that. I do not think that a mature medium, though, means one that is antiquated or not relevant. I think that's really key. I think you can be mature and be incredibly relevant to consumers, and that maturity is demonstrated on the build up to that relevance over time.
Sure. The maturity is what gives you your legacy and your brand connection to people. Jan, how do you define traditional media?
I think it's interesting. We interchangeably use the words mature and traditional. And I do think that in some ways those definitions coincide, but I think there's also some nuances there that are important to explore. So when I think about traditional media, I think about media that over time, I think as Marla said, has built up a legacy of quantification, of value, of accountability, and return on investment, because we really can't talk about media in a vacuum without looking at what it delivers to our clients. But when we look at traditional, I've actually used the term traditional digital, because we're at a place now where media that was new not that long ago is also matured very quickly to become a mainstay of most every brand's plans. So the way that I define it, again, is back to, is this media, whether you call it traditional or mature or legacy, a media that we are comfortable with ascribing a known history, value, and trust factor. I think many times traditional or mature media do have a lot of license to evolve into new and unproven territory based on the foundation that they build, and they need to continue to do that.
The notion of it being performant and what to expect around that performance, I think also is part of what we're talking about when we say a mature medium.
Sure, sure. And we'll talk more about performance measurement in a moment. And thank you both for kind of distinguishing the terms, traditional versus mature. It's really interesting to note the semantic differences there. Let's just switch gears for a moment and talk about the current state of the world and its effect on media. How has the pandemic impacted media consumption and media plans? And, Jan, I know you have something to say on this point. So how has it been from your vantage point?
Yeah, so I'm coming at this, in a way in terms of, as a professional, we have been evaluating the shifts in media consumption from the very start of the pandemic affecting the US. And that happened right around the middle of March. And that date for me is etched in stone because I myself was a victim of the pandemic. I had COVID and saw my own media behaviors impacted extensively by the COVID pandemic. Now, I don't want to be focus group of one here because, that is a dangerous route to take. But I will say that in my own experience and my own behaviors, it was more of everything. I watched TV more. I spent a lot more time with streaming services, many of which were not ad supported. I read more. I used social more to stay connected with friends and family that I didn't have the luxury of seeing face to face. I, transacted more online. I did everything that we've been reading about. So not only did I live it from a personal level, but seeing the impact in terms of how media consumption shifted to, first and foremost, a lot more fragmentation because people were doing a lot more things with the time they had and the changes in their own habits. And we also saw an impact on even transacting with our physicians and then how that ultimately impacted media behaviors in terms of needing to do more of our own research, getting into telemedicine. So yeah, a full scale change. And, again, it's something I lived personally.
Forced us all to kind of get smart on a lot of things that we might not have been so up on for sure very quickly. Also wanted to ask, in terms of pharma's digital ad push, which we've seen obviously over the last many months, it kind of forced an evolution of pharma to go from let's say more mature media to more digital media, even the traditional kind of digital media. But Marla, from your perspective, have agencies do they keep print as a medium bought by print sellers only, or do they buy on multiple platforms? What's been the dynamic there?
It's definitely both, right? So what I would say is, just to piggyback off of what Jan said, we saw consumer behavior shift across the board and consumption of our brands. I think people went to trusted brands that could inform them, but also inspire them during that time. So increases in subscription and engagement for us, were at an all-time and continue to be at an all-time high, from a way in which pharma advertisers in particular have evolved how they think about us. I would say is both, right? We are seeing, from a print perspective, the pharma investment arena continue to increase in a time where many advertisers are decreasing print investment. We're not seeing that within the pharma category. They're an area of increased in investment, as well as in digital. So I would say that depending on what the initiatives are, we're either seeing a print and digital or an integrated investment happen. There's very few areas in which it may just be one. And certainly there are some that are just doing digital, but for the most part, we're seeing a lot of integration across the board and seeing the value of reaching our consumers on all the platforms she's engaging with.
I'd like to just switch gears here and move over to challenges and opportunities for a minute. When we look at the landscape of the last 7 months or so, we see fewer in-person doctor visits, of course, routine surgeries postponed, a rise in telemedicine visits, all translating into fewer patients at the brick and mortar point of care. Jan, from your point of view, how has that impacted you on the media buying side?
Well, it's certainly been a bit of an acceleration in terms of our embracing of telemedicine and telemedicine channels, because we need to follow our patients and we need to be where they are. And if they're unfortunately seeing their doctor in person less because of the fear of treating conditions or getting information about conditions that are not COVID, we need to make sure that we stay an available resource to them wherever they are. So certainly we've become a very quick study on the opportunities in telemedicine, but at the same time, I don't want to go too far down that path, because the majority of visits, now that we're out of, the so-called like lockdowns, are still are the brick and mortar. More visits are still to doctors physically than telemedicine, but the gap is closing, and we've reached again that sort of tipping point of needing to consider telemedicine channels as an important and relevant way to reach our patients.
We see telemedicine as coming on really strong during, obviously, the pandemic, and it seems to be stabilizing and creating kind of a consistent level of engagement, Jim, to what you said. And for us, I think we think of it from a content perspective, that there's so much value we could add within that platform and that channel. But what I'm not particularly clear on is what is that ad opportunity, and how do you bring a brand safely into that environment? And I would imagine that's still something that you guys are thinking of, but have you had any success, or is there a particular thing you're thinking of there?
Again, it's still sort of fledgling. It's a new channel in terms of opportunities, more so than it was, say, a year or two ago. It's growing. There are more opportunities, but again, it's not like the floodgates have suddenly opened and there's massive uptake of opportunities to reach people in a telemedicine environment. However, there are targeting opportunities around patients that are engaging with telemedicine apps and, following the behavior. So we're looking at new and different ways of reaching our patients who are finding telemedicine to be an opportune channel for them, given their specific conditions. Certain conditions are never going to be heavy telemedicine, because they do require that, hands-on, whether it's exam or testing or other, integrations with their physicians. But others are very ripe for telemedicine. Think mental health as an example. And, while that's not an area that I'm necessarily involved in currently, I have been very much in the past with clients. That's an area where you're seeing a lot of people using, whether it's talk therapy or, getting, resources, where that's a perfect example of telemedicine being like a literal lifesaver for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And, while advertisers are in a state of transition from in-person promotion to virtual, and commercial tactics certainly look a lot different these days, more digital, advertisers, from what I've heard, are more open to innovation and tearing it all down, as it were. Marla, how have you, sort of seized upon this opportunity to forge new partnerships and kind of get experimental on the sell side?
So in so many ways, we've really taken advantage. In the point of care, to what we were talking about specifically, we still see the doctor's office as being incredibly valuable, and we're continuing to innovate by bringing on new partners. And so we just were able to announce that, we're strong in our digital opportunities. So you go to the doctor's office, you can have a digital download, you can still read a print custom magazine within a doctor's office. And we know that video is going to be even more important. And with that, we have announced a new partnership with the Health Media Network. And we're calling it the Meredith Health Media Network, where we're going to be empowering the media network with our content and being able to bring advertisers in and around the quality Meredith content while waiting in the doctor's office. We're continuing to innovate across the board. So in terms of the print platform, we're using, QR codes. We know, especially the pandemic, I think, is fast tracking the usage and the consumer behavior around just using the camera on the phone to be able to unlock content and information. So we've been a leader in that in the print side for some time, where we're bridging our digital world and our print world by enabling consumers the ability to use their phones and have what we call our smart codes to unlock additional content or take people from content to video and drive people even from content down to commerce. So lots of innovation on all of our platforms.
And that was a question actually that somebody had just put forth was, what are some of the new platforms you've seen come forward during the pandemic?
We are across the board. We think about audio, and both from a developing content that people can listen to if they're not in a format that they can actually read it. So content to audio capabilities, podcasts are on the rise for us, and testing in different environments the way in which we do podcasts. So things like our EW brand, the Binge, which we take different shows and bring kind of unique angles of reporting on those shows, all the way through to we launched a new podcast. It's called the Daily Podcast with our People brand. So I would say that we keep looking at where the consumer is going and how do we get to those platforms before she does, and test and learn both with our content and oftentimes with some of our advertising partners of where are those environments. But during the pandemic in particular, I would say audio continued to be an area of innovation, as is unlocking content through smart codes, as well as for us, areas of innovation is also how to deliver the right messages to from our advertisers to our consumers. So something we launched around this time was called Predictive Advertising, which is taking some of the really unique data signals we have and putting the right message at the right time to the right consumer, with context being at the center.
Sure. Thanks for mentioning that. And, amidst all of this experimentation and a move to digital, or to a greater extent, what kind of effect has that had for you as a media company in terms of measurement? Has that made things easier? And how have you made up for the lack of in-person exposure, one person is asking, due to a decline in HCP office visits?
Well, so when it comes to point of care, I think that question is specific to the point of care.
Right.
What we found is that even though, during that time, obviously in the height of it, where doctors were only doing televisits, I think everyone, just had a dramatic impact to their business, no question. But what we're seeing is, even through the challenges right now at the moment, our performance is still best in class. And it's better than most point of care companies, as I know it, is, the typical industry performance is kind of a 4-to-1 from an ROI perspective. And I believe the Meredith point of care solutions are still driving a 10-to-1 return on investment. So it may be that it's not at the performance and the scale that we used to have, but we're still driving great success and results. And as doctors continue to, broaden out their office hours and consumers get back into the doctor's office, we're there to bring content to consumers in those environments, with advertisers helping to sponsor that content or enhance that content. And again, all the different ways that they want. So if someone's not comfortable holding up a piece of printed material, we've got digital unlocks for them. And again, with our partnership now with the Health Media Network, we'll have our content on screens while you're waiting. So we're trying to super serve the consumer wherever they are, and at the same time drive the performance for our advertisers.
Sure. Great. Follow the consumer wherever they are. That sounds like a smart strategy. Let's, as we wait for Jan to get back online here, I think she was having some connectivity issues. Let's just switch gears and switch over to the future a little bit, get you to kind of prognosticate a bit, Marla. How can, biopharma medical device advertisers make the most of mature media's capability moving forward?
I think there's so much that we can do in terms of using the data and the insights we have about consumers and driving both content, right? So at the end of the day, consumers want to engage and be around content that they trust, that can inspire and inform them. And so aligning with that type of quality content, I think, is absolutely core to it. Identifying, like we talked about earlier, where the consumer is going by utilizing those trends and creating experiences in those new environments is also another kind of key way. And so how do we continue those innovations and recognizing the way that consumers want to engage in content and what they're looking for. So whether it's getting creative in the social space through our brands, whether it's having the audio content, and then it's also making sure that the messages are right and that they're timely and relevant. And I think it's the combination of those things that will continue to drive results as we look to the future. Performance and proving the measurement around that advertising initiative, whatever it is key. So how do we together continue to realize that we do the Meredith sales guarantee? And in the pharma space, we've had incredible success in proving our ability not only to create an impression on the consumer, but to actually drive scripts. And I think you have to continue to innovate. How do you do that through print? How do you prove the measurement on digital? So we've got a print Meredith sales guarantee. We've got a digital. We have a cross integrated sales guarantee. We've launched one around video, and we're just continuing to innovate and improve the efficacy of the programs that we create.
Sure. Are you seeing a kind of stepwise shift amongst pharma to incorporate these kinds of things into its media plans? Do you think they're keeping up with the pace of all of this?
I think there's a lot of pharmaceutical companies who have been very innovative in the category, who are pushing the boundaries in a really meaningful way. They're pushing us to be smarter, doing everything with a privacy, obviously compliance at the forefront, recognizing the legal concerns and the more rigor that the pharmaceutical industry has around that. But I think that there has been, I would say, this past 12 months, we've seen a lot of pharmaceutical companies really step up and do some different things and are looking to engage consumers in a really meaningful way. So I feel like there's been a huge shift, and I think that the next 12 months represents a great opportunity for that to continue to evolve.
Sure. And speaking of that, forward-looking approach, what impact, do you think from the pandemic will stick? And, what may go back to, business as usual after the pandemic, God willing, is in the rearview mirror?
It's so hard to even imagine, right? At this point, it's
Yeah.
crazy. I just took my first airline yesterday, and it was like, oh my gosh, I've never seen an airport so empty in my whole life. So hard to imagine another world. I think some of the great learnings, though, that we've gotten is, just the level of authenticity. And I think that consumers at large have shifted some of their priorities. And so I believe that will stick. Eventually, will we all get overscheduled again? Certainly, but finding the sources of information that you trust and really kind of honing in on the aspects of life that matter. And I think that that's probably one of the key things is from a consumer behavior trend is really focusing on that and then making sure that we as a content provider and the audience here as people wanting to engage and connect with those consumers is continuing to find ways to help consumers today stay focused on those areas that matter most and demonstrate the understanding of that, I guess is the best way to say it. So I feel like in terms of what sticks, it's that level of consumer prioritization from a media perspective, bringing content on new platforms and continuing to create ease and flexibility, I think are additional things that will stick. So from an advertiser perspective, some of the biggest trends, and I know Jan's back on, so I will pause in a minute so she can get back into the conversation. But some of the big things that we've seen from advertisers at large is the need for flexibility or personalization and localization. And I think that those really mirror what consumers want, right? Consumers want personalization in a safe and in a meaningful way. They want, what does it mean to me? They want flexibility too. And so I think that those three trends will stick. Some of the things that I'm hoping don't stick as much is a little bit of the kind of crazy real-time nature of some of it, because we, in order to be extremely thoughtful in some of the things that you build, having a little bit more time and timelines in order to create that, I think is important. So real time in that you want to ebb and flow with consumer needs. But But from a real-time planning perspective and executing of campaigns, a little more time, I think, is better for everybody.
Jan, welcome back. Just wanted to get your take on that too. I just asked Marla what she expects from the impact of the pandemic will stick around post-pandemic, even though it's hard for us at this point to envision that future, but it will one day be in the rearview mirror. But what do you think will stick, and what will be going back to business as usual on, if anything?
For me, I think that few things that are going to stick, at least in my mind, is one, the idea of expecting the unexpected and not being so predictable in terms of what is going to impact our planning. A second is the continued need for flexibility and dynamic conditions with our partners, because if this pandemic has proven nothing else, it's certainly proven that we don't always know what's coming around the bend, and we as stewards of our clients' budgets need to be flexible and need to be able to rethink on a dime what the future might look like. What I do think will kind of come out of this all is the resilience of our patients, of our population, and of seeing people embrace the need for really good content in whatever form they choose to engage with it. I think we've seen that people are very willing to adapt, and they are open to consuming media through many different types of channels, again, as long as the content and the resources are strong.
Sure. And Marla addressed this, but I would love to get your take on it too, Jan. What are some of the new platforms you've seen come forward during the pandemic that you'd be inclined to try or have already tried with some of your brands?
We talked about, exploring more in telemedicine. I think evolving some of our, quote, more traditional channels to be more relevant to today's way of consuming content. So if we look at video, for example, it really truly is video everywhere, even if that everywhere is in your living room. You don't necessarily have to be out and about to consume content in many different ways, be it on different screens or through different pipes. So we need to be flexible in terms of how we actually buy or procure that content for our messages to resonate. I think we've also seen that many of the shifts in behavior have gone to areas where there aren't necessarily opportunities to send a pure ad message. So we need to rethink what our engagements with our patients look like, be it custom content or new areas. And, I think we talked about earlier in the conversation, every channel, be it digital, be it print, be it broadcast, point of care, etc., is in an evolving state. And it keeps us on our toes, and it keeps this business interesting and exciting to always think of what's next for us.
Absolutely. Yeah. What's next is the question we're all focused on. So we're now in the formally, I think, in the Q&A portion of our talk. I'd love to get started with this one that you both kind of suggested during the break when we were talking, which I think is a great one. Given that it's a buyer-seller conversation here, how has that dynamic changed given the virtual nature of your engagements now? And, what do you both need from one another in this new environment? How can you be better together in a virtual world? And Marla, you want to take the first crack at that one?
Yes. I think that it's so important from a seller perspective, right, that we are much more to the point and more consultative. And that's one of the things that I've been really kind of guiding my overall team with, is that in a world in which we're all on screens all day, you can multitask without necessarily knowing it. We've got to really get to the point and lead with the headline. The relationships matter greatly, but that at the end of the day, having a really strong point of view of how we can help and leading with that is going to be key. I think from a what we need from the other side, right? So from Jan and the buying community and clients alike is, when you don't know somebody, tell us how do we build. I think one of the challenges, I guess maybe it's not what I need, but I think the big challenge for us is how do you build a relationship where you don't know it? I mean, fortunately, Jan and I have known each other for so many years, but there's lots of people that you want to build a relationship with that now you may have an offering that can actually really be material to their business. How do you create a relationship virtually? And I think that's a huge challenge for us. So I don't know that I have the answer, but it's definitely a challenge. But I think from a sales side, we need to be by far more consultative.
And what's your take on that? How do you make that relationship stronger, even stronger?
I very much appreciate that point of view, Marla, because I can speak for myself, but I could also speak for my teams, my clients, my colleagues. Despite the fact that most of us, if not all of us, are working from home the vast majority of the time, if not all the time, we've never been busier. There's never been more evaluations and challenges and contingency plans and needs to be flexible. So to the degree that, as you said, Marla, to the point, be compelling, help us help you, but it's very much about flexibility, about understanding that, you've got to be a bit different on a screen. You've got to be very focused. You've got to have a compelling reason to want to meet. But, what I will challenge is I have been asked a question that you asked, Marla, many, many years even before the pandemic. How do you get in the door? How do you, and where it used to be a physical door, now it's a virtual door. And the advice that I always give to my friends in the sales community is there's always going to be a connection if you look hard enough. If you dig deep enough into your network and your colleagues' networks, and there's always going to be someone who can help you. And we on the buying side and on the strategy side, we want to bring exciting, fresh, new ideas to our clients. That's what we literally live for. We want to bring them great thinking and ideas and opportunities. So, just be really good at finding that hook, finding that first to market, that never been done, that exciting opportunity, because we are hungry for it. Despite the fact that we're busy and despite the fact that we're challenged in terms of our time and our resources from both a professional and in many cases a personal level, we want to all be heroes together for our clients and ultimately for our patients. We want to make them healthier.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure everybody at home, at their home offices, has enjoyed that interplay. And just want to remind everybody to please submit a question if you have one. We got about 5 minutes left with Marla and Jan here. Jan, since we're with you, I wanted to ask you, from the media buyer point of view, what media brands are you seeing getting traction?
It's hard in real time because measurement typically lags exposure. But, look, we're still, as an industry, putting a lot of resources behind, circling back to the beginning of the conversation, what would normally be considered mature or traditional channels, because they've been proven to work. At the same time, we're evolving those channels to be more inclusive and more expanded. But, what's working is what is engaging to our audience. We're still seeing great success in search. We're seeing growing traction in our social engagements. We're definitely seeing traditional and online and alternative ways of consuming video still all working. And what really ultimately is going to work best is not trying to just limit yourself to one tactic or one area. We need to be flexible. We need to be where our patients are, and we need to follow the market. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing still a base level of reliance on our tried and true, but with a spin, with a twist.
Sure. And, amidst this period of experimentation and innovation, which is very refreshing to hear, especially for somebody like a reporter who's been covering the business for a while, and you typically associate the industry with conservatism. Is compliance any more or less of an issue these days? And what are the biggest watchouts? Marla, do you want to take a stab at that? How you're advising clients to maintain regulatory compliance these days?
So I think everyone is sharing a common goal of having known users, right? Understanding and having a direct one-to-one relationship with consumers. I mean, that's the holy grail for everybody. For us, how we target, how we bring value to consumers in a safe and compliant way is absolutely critical. And so when we partner, especially in the pharma space, we've got a chief privacy officer. Everything we do is with the consumer's protection at the forefront. And how do we bring more value to them? So it's just a blanket yes to your question. Is it's extremely important, and we work with all of our partners to ensure that that is at the forefront of what we do, and we wouldn't put them or ourselves at risk in not being compliant with that. We just feel that it's so important to have a trusted relationship.
Sure. And Jan, is that more or less of an issue from your perspective, from the clients that you deal with, in terms of brand safety and that sort of thing these days?
You know what? I consider that like a non-negotiable. That is table stakes. Brand safety, environment, compliance, those are fundamental to a relationship. And when a partner breaks that trust, that is a very, very hard thing to recover from. It's very hard to go back and reprove yourself when you've broken the agency and the client's trust in what needs to be a fundamental business relationship tenet. So, I don't know if I could be any more strong than that, but
Yeah.
that is, as important as it gets.
Sure, and we saw some pharma brands, pausing. We saw it on social media, and it seemed like they were kind of aligning their social media presence with their stance on racism, and this was kind of following the George Floyd death, but earlier this year, and then they seemed to kind of come back online onto those platforms, our interpretation from the media side was it was more of a brand safety thing rather than, okay, we're coming out aligning with, say, the Black Lives Matter movement. Are you still seeing kind of the overall obviously you are seeing obviously that your comments about brand safety's predominance and importance is still there. Are you seeing them align with social causes a little bit more this year, given we had the twin demics of the COVID-19 along with the social unrest following the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor? Do you see kind of healthcare brands kind of getting a little more comfortable reacting to social causes?
Yes, certainly we've seen that. Now, obviously we're talking about the healthcare space. I think it's pervasive across the entire advertising space that brands don't want to be called out as not being sensitive to causes. But we also, I think as an industry, have to be careful because there's a fine line between serving our patients and serving our consumers and being absent. And the reason why we market to consumers is, and I'm going to talk about on the healthcare side, is because we want to better or save our patients' lives, right? We want to give them better health outcomes. And by walking away from media, we potentially are also doing a disservice to patients because we're not there when we're needed. We're not communicating important messages, but we need to do that with a sensitivity towards, are we partnering with partners that are sensitive to the right messages on their platforms, no matter what that be. It could be a news program on television, it could be a social media channel, but we need to think about the company we keep in terms of the environment, and we are always reevaluating that. I think the whole industry is.
Absolutely. Great advice. Okay, wanted to just I guess finish up here with getting your views on what you foresee in the next 6 to 12 months in terms of potential for adaptation or change. Marla, how about we start with you on that one?
I think that the continuation of the flexibility, like we talked about, the need to the key trends that consumer behaviors are demonstrating. I think that the next 12 months is going to be just a continued focus on how do you demonstrate, at least again, going back to us as a media company, how do we continue to innovate and have meaningful content that's tailored to our consumers, and at the same time bring advertisers into that message in a way that adds really value to the consumer and protects the consumer's privacy along that journey.
Jan, what do you foresee in the next 6 to 12 months in terms of the potential for adaptation or change?
Well, first, I'll sort of reiterate a theme, lots of flexibility and contingency planning, because we just don't know what's going to happen. If you'd asked me a few months ago if we would have, 130,000 COVID deaths not deaths, excuse me, 130,000 COVID diagnoses in one day in November, I wouldn't have foreseen that. I would have hoped it really would have turned the corner, but we haven't, and we have to be very cognizant that we don't know what road is ahead. But on a hopeful note, my personal hope for our entire industry is that healthcare is the hero, that we are able to get through this with the dedication of the researchers and the scientists and the pharma companies and the doctors, and, really getting us out of this and allowing us to get back to some semblance of what normal used to look like. So I see a really strong platform for health coming up in the future to be the voice of hope and the voice of, the future.
Sure. That's a very hopeful note to sort of end on. Every time you see the grim statistics of 1.2 million deaths worldwide, I think 50 million cases worldwide, it's hard to fathom. But obviously some very hopeful vaccine news this week, with the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine showing 90% efficacy. And I think Moderna is about to, which is on the same platform, the mRNA platform, to saying that they're going to be imminently releasing their results too. I think this bodes well, not only for the vaccines, but for our seeing a light at the end of the tunnel to this protracted battle with the pandemic. And I would hope and expect to see health media playing a big role in this next stage, which will be getting the public prepared to vaccinate, and addressing all their questions, concerns, safety, efficacy, distribution, and otherwise. And so, that's I would imagine that's probably the next frontier, right, for health media in terms of the pandemic and kind of serving that role.
Yes, I mean, we're already starting to see people plan for that, right? I think there's so much to be done in terms of the education, and like you said, putting the consumer at ease to take the action needed for everyone to get back to a more normal existence.
Absolutely.
We've got to get people back to getting their medical testing and their preventative care. And, there's a lot that can and should happen in our industry over the next, as you say, 6 months to a year, and even beyond that, just to make sure that we have a healthier population. And I think all of us listening and all of us have a role to play in that. And I'm proud to be part of that.
Absolutely. Hear, hear. Okay, that's a fitting note to end on, a very hopeful one. Unfortunately, we're out of time here, but I want to thank so much again, Jan and Marla, for joining me and for a great discussion. Thank you both.
Thank you, and apologies for the technical difficulties. If I knew how it happened, it wouldn't have happened.
Not at all. No, it's only by the grace of God that my internet connection lasts as well. But that's going to do it for the theater portion of today's event. So thank you to all of you for tuning in and being here with us. We really appreciate it. The environment will be open until 4:30. So if you haven't had a chance to do so already, make sure to stop by the expo hall and visit all the sponsor booths. And please also take a minute to fill out our exit survey before you head out the doors virtually. Thanks again, everyone, for a fantastic day, and hope to see you for another event soon. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.